What up, everybody, and welcome to Baz on Blades. My name is Baz, and I talk about blades. Today's feature blade is a product from Cold Steel. What we've got is a drop forged hunter. Look at this, guys. This is a drop forged single piece fixed blade knife in a drop point configuration. You can take a quick close look at this. It is one solid piece of steel, guys, and this is produced from the drop forging technique, which I will get into a little bit later. Now this model number is the 36M, as in Mary, and it was the first of the drop forge series from Cold Steel, which apparently has gained some ground because just recently, this last year, 2017, 2018, they have expanded this line with 5 or 6 models. So it seems to be doing very well for them. Now there is a second version of this knife. It is called the 36MA. And while the 36M comes with a leather sheath, the 36MA has an all-over black finish, and it comes with a Kydex sheath. So basically the same knife, just with a different finish on it and a different sheath. This version going for about $49. The MA version in black I saw is going for about $43, and I used Blade HQ as my reference for both of those prices. All right, this does come with a pretty decent leather sheath. Now it is a pouch type sheath, a clamshell that is sewn on one side with a double row of stitching, nice heavy thread, and on that it is stamped with the Cold Steel Anytime Anywhere logo. It does have a fold over basic belt loop. The leather seems to be of pretty decent quality, and it's well made. It's not precision wet molded, but it does have fairly decent retention on this knife as a sort of a basic carry and storage sheath. Now, this could not be mounted horizontally or upside down because that knife can slip out of it. But for basic carry, where you're not going to have to run and sprint and climb a mountain and swim across a river, it will work pretty decently, guys. All right. Let's see. Let's go ahead and knock out the specs on this, and then we're going to talk about the steel a little bit. We're going to talk about the drop forging technique a little bit because I find that really interesting myself. Let's see. This is a 4-inch bladed fixed blade knife, and that's about 10 centimeters. The blade stock thickness is 195 thousandths of an inch, or 4.8 millimeters. The blade width is 1.52 inches, or 38.7 millimeters. Your handle length, 4 3/4 of an inch, or 12 centimeters. Your handle thickness, 362 thousandths of an inch, or 9.2 millimeters. The handle width. Now at the widest, it is the same width as the blade, which is 1.52 inches, or 38.7 millimeters. And then in the center section here, it is it's 1.04 inches and 26.5 millimeters. Now, behind the edge thickness on this blade is about 30 thousandths of an inch, and it has a fairly narrow and steep edge bevel on it. If I was going to buy this knife myself, I would probably resharpen it and do a little bit thinner edge bevel on it. The weight, a fairly substantial 8.25 ounces, or 234 grams. Without the sheath. With the sheath, you're looking at 10.4 ounces, or 295 grams. All right, I hope I made it through those specs without screwing all that up. Let's talk about the steel first. This is drop forged out of 52-100 bearing steel. This is an industrial used ball bearing steel. It is a simple alloy carbon steel, and it is very popular within certain groups. It's actually a really decent blade steel, but it is a carbon steel, and it is not rust proof or rust resistant, really. Although this knife being in a bead blast finish, which usually seems to attract moisture and rust, it is not having any issues. Now, this is a loaner knife. It was loaned to me by an old friend who just dropped by the house out of the blue and said, "Hey, I've been watching your videos. You want to review this knife?" And I was like, "Hey, thanks for watching, and yes, I will review it." That's fine, because this is actually a knife that I have considered myself, especially taking into account that you can get it for $49 or less. That's a pretty decent price on what should be a fairly indestructible knife. But 52-100 steel is a high carbon bearing steel. You're looking at about 0.9 to 1.1% carbon. Your chromium is 1.3 to 1.6, and it is a nitrogen alloyed steel. The nitrogen tends to work with the chromium to form chromium carbides within the matrix of the steel. And what that gives you is a steel that is fairly easy to resharpen, but has excellent edge retention or wear resistance. And that is something you do not often see in steels. It has good impact resistance or toughness, and fairly average corrosion resistance for a common carbon steel. As you can see, this knife has been carried in a vehicle. Its owner is not really a knife enthusiast, and I don't think there's no oil on it or anything like that, and I haven't cleaned it. You see there's no rust issues on it, and that's pretty decent right there. So not, crazy to rust, but you do get very good edge resistance or edge retention and wear resistance, and pretty decent impact resistance or toughness with this. Now, a fun little fact on this is this steel is used in a modified version by Bussey Knives as their SR101 steel, and it has a cult following. Within the custom knife community, there are a couple of guys within the custom knife community that swear by this steel, only use this steel as for hand forging, and the reputation is miraculous what they do with it. So it can be a very, very good steel. Now, let's talk about drop forging, and I have an interest in that because I've worked in steel stamping before, and while it's not the same thing, it's still big, huge pieces of equipment banging steel into shapes. And what drop forging is it's forging, guys. And you take somebody that forges knives, and they take a heated billet of steel and they hammer it slowly and by incremental steps from a rough billet down to a refined shape with bevels and everything. And they do it, they heat it, and then they hammer on it, and then they heat it, and then they hammer on it, then they heat it and they shape it, and they heat it and they hammer on it, and they refine it and refine it and refine it, heat it, and they go at it and go at it and go at it, and end up with a knife that you have to do very little grinding on. In the hammer forge process, you've got a machine doing this hammering, and what they use is a two-part die. You've got a lower and an upper section of the die that form the half of the knife. The knife will be sitting like this. You've got the upper part of the die here, the lower part of the die here. The lower part of the die, they rest the heated steel billet in, and then the upper part hammers down on it. And what it does is it hammer forges this steel out to the shape of the dies that they use. And what that does, it allows them to use forging and the benefits and strengths of forging steel in a higher volume industrial atmosphere. It's a little more economic, of course, than hand forging. It's much quicker. You can do it in higher volume. There is more more of a consistency from piece to piece. In fact, with well-made dies and an experienced operator, you can run a high volume with extremely consistent pieces with extremely high quality. It's just something I find really, really interesting. Now, this is an integral, single piece, drop forge piece of steel knife. It should be virtually indestructible, guys, and that to me is its selling point. You've got one material here. You don't have any connectors, no fasteners, no handle material, no nothing. You've got that 52-100 steel. So there's not really much to go into on materials here, what I haven't covered already. Now, fit and finish. Guys, it's a piece of steel. We'll get up real close here. You can see there's a few scuffs on it from use, but other than that, you don't see a lot of tooling marks or anything like that. It's a very, very basic. There's really not much to say about the fit and finish other than we'll go up here to the edge on the blade. It's 30 thousandths of an inch on the edge thickness. It's fairly consistent side to side. I will say that it's a fairly short secondary bevel. I would have preferred to see them sharpen this with a wider secondary bevel. And really what I miss the most on this knife is there's no sharpening choil. Sharpening this would be like sharpening most Spyderco knives. You're just going to have to sharpen right up against the plunge, which thankfully is an abrupt plunge. So it would ease that a little bit, but really there's not much you can do as far as sharpening to the termination of the edge without getting into that plunge a little bit, unless you're going to grind a little sharpening choil here, and that is absolutely, if I end up buying one of these knives myself, which I may, I absolutely will do that, whether I do it with a file or a carbide bit, Dremel, whatever. I would probably do that. As far as the handle here, there's no fit and finish, guys. It's drop forged. It's a solid piece of steel that's heated and stamped out to a shape. Let's go on. We can skip over action because it's not a folder, but let's go on to ergos and utility use, and I think that's where we'll do most of our talking outside of just the steel and the manufacturing technique. Utility use in this blade, it's a drop point blade. I've said many times, guys, in my opinion, drop point blades are the most utilitarian profiles that there are, and this is a classic wide, fully flat ground, fairly pointy drop point configuration. Now you are in 4.8 millimeter blade stock thickness, guys. That's pretty substantial, but it is a wide blade and a full flat grind. The only thing that I find slightly disappointing in this is that it's 30 thousandths of an inch behind the edge thickness. And while that would be very tough, and while the edge could be refined to be more slicey, I would have liked to have seen that down around 25 thousandths to 22 thousandths of an inch, because you've got a lot of blade width to move that flat grind across. It could have been a little thinner. But as far as utility use of a drop point, guys, it is what it is. You're going to be doing some cutting and slicing. It's going to be very tough. It is plenty pointy enough to do some piercing and digging with. Weight notwithstanding, this would be an excellent knife as a last ditch sort of knife to have in a bug out bag. Really the only downsides to that would be slightly higher weight at 8 1/4 ounces without the sheath, and tendency to rust if not taken care of, at least a minimum of care. Now, let's go into the ergonomics of the handle, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is a fairly thin handle. You're looking at, on the handle thickness, 362 thousandths of an inch, a third plus of an inch, and you would think, man, that's way too narrow, it's not going to fit my hands, it just doesn't look comfortable. And you know what, guys, I thought the same thing. That is, I really wanted to put my hands on this knife, and once I did, I saw that there's some voodoo going on here, and I'm going to try to show you guys on video. The handle is recessed, is dished on both sides. So your major thickness is in the spine of the handle here on the inside, and then it's dished much thinner on the middle. Now when you hold this knife, okay, we're going to try to look at this right here. The ball of my hand right here and the tips of my finger both go down inside of those recesses in my natural grip. It actually feels really good, surprisingly good, guys. I am not joking. In a forward grip, this knife is actually really comfortable, surprisingly so. In a reverse grip, it's the same thing. Same thing, guys. You've got a nice butt end to cap here with your thumb. Now you start getting into things like a draw grip, and it feels, the fingers of my hand still fall within that recess, and the ball of my hand does too. And it actually, you know what, it feels pretty decent, guys. This knife, I could see using this in a draw grip. Honestly, I could. I'm very surprised at how comfortable this grip is. So ergonomically, look, guys, it's you've got a dip in here to this narrower handle width, and then a bird's beak on this end. It's very basic. It works for every grip. In my medium-sized hands, as I've said a couple of times now, it's surprisingly comfortable. The steel, the metal, the handle, the knife, it warms up in your hand, and right now in a controlled environment, it's really comfortable to hold. It's the tactile feel of it is comforting. Now in extremely cold weather, yeah, you're going to have to put some heat in this. You would want to carry this close to your body. I could see in some extreme instances, in places where it gets down into negative degrees Fahrenheit, that you would definitely not want to carry this knife and use it, unless you had a toaster oven around to heat it up first, and you were just going to heat it up in a toaster oven and carry it down in your pants to keep you warm. And that would be an option, I'm sure. I don't know how you would keep that toaster oven plugged in while you're out in the field, but maybe you could drag a generator around too. I mean, the knife is 8 1/4 ounces, a toaster oven and a generator and an extension cord and fuel. It's not going to be that much more weight. So there you go, problem solved. But ergonomically, it's great, guys. At least in my medium-sized hands. Now, I think it would work in small-sized hands also. Extra large hands, you might find that where it's falling just perfect in my grip, it may not work for extra large hands. You would just have to try and see, guys. Luckily there's a whole bunch of places that carry cold steel products, so you do get a fairly good chance of putting hands on this product. So guys, you know what, this is it's a very interesting knife. Is it too heavy? I don't know. It feels substantial and heavy in the hands. It's a big block of steel, guys. Is it worth it to you? Is the weight worth it to you in the trade-off of how would I destroy this? How would I destroy this knife? 4.8 millimeter blade stock thickness. You can see it's not a dainty tip. It is a full flat grind, and I think if you refine the edge a little bit, it'd be a pretty damn decent slicer. So you get a lot of performance for that weight in addition to the sort of indestructible feel of it. But that's sort of a balancing act that you have to decide whether it's worth it to you. Now, to me, it's probably not something that I would carry. Would I want to put it into my collection? I think I am. I think I'm going to buy one of these. I think I'm going to buy the black version with the Kydex sheath. And I just think that it's sort of a neat, this one-piece drop forged build technique is just appealing enough to me because of my background in stamping that, you know, at $43 to $49, I think I would add it to my collection. And I think that I would add a sharpening choil to it, and I would refine the edge a little bit. And then if I was ever in the need for something that was absolutely indestructible, I think that I could easily fall back on it. So in that case, yes, Bazon Blades can recommend the Cold Steel Drop Forged Hunter Model 36M, or if you want the black version with the Kydex sheath, that's 36MA. I think that they are a pretty good deal for their price. The build quality, while very basic, admittingly, seems to be pretty high. Guys, if there's anything that I feel sort of out of whack on this review, because all the things that I normally talk about, they're just not there. They're just not there. Here, let's take a close look at how about I'll hold that right side up. These are Taiwanese made. It's one of their Taiwanese products. You can see it's in 52-100 high carbon, and it's a cold steel product. On this side, it's a drop forged hunter. You've got your little crosshairs, sort of rifle scope sort of marking there. I think that's actually fairly attractive, guys. Not too overly billboardy as far as cold steel goes, but yeah, I think it's pretty decent. So, you guys, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. God bless all of you, and we will talk to you again.